everyone, Paige here, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over my May reading wrap-up and then also my June TBR. So this month I read 6 books, 4 of which were physical books, 2 were audio books. If you've been here before, you know I do have a dog, so I walk her a lot. I walk her every day, so I listen to my audiobooks while I walk her, so I can usually get through 1, maybe 2 a week, depending on how short the book is. So to get started, I've just a quick disclaimer, I am a pretty easygoing reader. I do not have the tough analytic mind that goes to approaching a book. As long as it's entertaining and it gets my mind off things, that's all I look for in a book. So keep in mind whenever I'm going through my list that this is not like the bottom one, the first that it was my least favorite. That is not necessarily a 1 star. It takes a lot to get down to a 1 star. So without further ado, let's get started. So today I am going to be going through my May TBR from my least favorite to my most favorite. So first I have Nightrender by Jodi Meadows. I have read a lot of Jodi Meadows books. I really enjoyed The Orphan King and the Mirror King books. This one I didn't enjoy as much, but it was still entertaining. The concept was interesting. It's a dark fantasy, which is not something we 100% see in YA, so I like the take on the book. I do wish more people would read it because from Goodreads it doesn't look like a lot of people are reading it, and I really like her as an author, so I would love for her to succeed and keep being able to publish books. She's also fairly local, so I always like supporting my local authors. Yeah, so I am looking forward to when Dawnbreaker, which is the next book in this series, comes out. It'll be coming out in October. I did pick it up a little bit later than everybody else, but I didn't find out about it until pretty late. But yeah, so like I said, I enjoyed it. If you haven't read any of Jodi Meadows' books, I highly suggest reading one. She has a lot of different series. She has 2 duologies and 3 trilogies. So depending on more of like what you're interested in, I would highly recommend picking up one of these books. So the 5th book on my list, like I said, I read 6 in total. So the 5th book is The Boleyn Inheritance. I enjoyed this one. It was interesting to kind of see the aspects between Kitty Howard and Anne of Cleves. I am a historian by training, and my subject of history is the late medieval / the beginning of the early modern period. So this kind of falls right into where I am looking at. I picked up this book because I don't know a lot about Catherine Howard or Anne of Cleves. They're some of the 2 lesser known of King Henry VIII's wives. So there was a lot of things in here that the author at the end, Philippa Gregory, is also a historian. She has her PhD in history. But she says that it is a pretty lesser known, here, let me just read this. So in the book, she says, Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard are the 2 wives of Henry VIII whom we know the least. As so often the case, we think we know them well. In this fictional account of the real facts, I have tried to get past the convention of one wife was ugly, that would have been Anne of Cleves, and the other stupid. To consider the lives and circumstances of these 2 young women who were so briefly the most important women in England, successive wives to the man on the brink of madness. But this book really kind of dives into what these women could have been thinking. Neither of them really had much of a choice in it, and I think we kind of see that through more modern day historic accounts. So I have read multiple for other books. I have enjoyed all of them. Just in the grand scope of things, this one was kind of my least favorite. It's just because the pacing is a little bit slower. It's meant to be more of a slow burn book. But if you're looking for historical fiction and you like the Tudor period, or you like the early Renaissance or modern period, I recommend this. Philippa Gregory is an amazing writer. Next we have María and the Fox. I was really excited about this book, and after reading it I was still kind of excited, but it ended up being a lot different than what I thought. I thought it was going to be more of a enemies to lovers trope. From the description it kind of sounded like that. It did not end up being that way. I mean, kind of, but it's, if you haven't heard of this book yet, María and her three sisters flee Mexico during the second French occupation and head to London. During this time of the second French occupation, there is a huge influx of Mexican immigrants, and this is where we get Cinco de Mayo from, and yeah. I like this book because it shows diverse characters in Victorian England, which you don't always see. It is absolutely fun and fascinating to read. The author she writes the Victorian romances, and she does a lot of research in her books. Absolutely fantastic. I did love it. Like I said, I was a little bit disappointed, which is why it's a little further down on the list than I probably would have typically put it, because I thought it was going to be something else, but I did end up enjoying it. Next is Kingdom of the Feared by Kerri Maniscalco. Sorry, Kerri, I cannot pronounce your last name very well. I apologize. But if you guys have never read one of her books, she has 2 series out right now. This is her second one. The first one was Stalking Jack the Ripper, and that's where I first found her. I read those books as they came out. So this is the 3rd book in the trilogy, so I'm not going to go too much into the background of it. If you haven't read them and you like fantasy and you like a little bit more dark fantasy, I would recommend these. I did highly enjoy this book, but sometimes with the end of a series, things can get a little bit complicated. I think that's why this one ended up 3rd versus 1st or 2nd, is because there were times where I was like, was this part really necessary? But like I said, I enjoyed it. I love the characters. I read the first 2 books, and obviously, sorry about the 3rd. So overall, good story. Does get a little bit more adult than the other 2. The other 2 were definitely more YA. This one does lean more towards new adult. I would say the second one also leans more towards new adult. So if you're looking for something that's distracting, I read all 3 of these. The first and second I read last month, and I read each of those in like a day. This one took, I think, 3 days just because I read it during the work week. So it took me a little bit longer to actually read it. So the 2 audiobooks that I listened to were actually my favorites this month. The first one was Gilded. So this ranks number 2 on my list. I really enjoyed this book. I love the storytelling. I love the characters. Marissa Meyer is absolutely fantastic on writing retellings. There are a couple of different aspects that dragged a little bit. Some of the pacing was off, but overall, fantastic book. I gave it 5 stars. Like I said, I'm a very easygoing reader, so it's not that hard to get 5 stars for me. But I really, really enjoyed it. And that leads to number 1, which is Cursed, which is the second book to Gilded. It's not very often that I enjoy the second book more than I enjoyed the first. I listened to this book almost non-stop. I finished it and I returned it to the library like 4 days early, which is a 16-hour audiobook. So I did listen to it. This one, the pacing was on point. The hints from the first book were there. They tied in super nicely to the second book. And I know writing duologies is kind of hard because it's like basically you're writing one huge book, but you're splitting it up into 2. So you need the beginning, middle, and end for the first book. You need the beginning, middle, and end for the second book. But the second book starts in the middle. And you have to wrap everything up. So if you haven't read Gilded and Cursed. I would highly recommend those. Those are probably my two favorite. I also don't know if the reason why I gave them such high stars is because of the narrator. The narrator was fantastic. I always want to factor that in, because sometimes with audiobooks, if you don't have the right narrator, it can ruin the book, and you can end up reading the book later and loving it, but hating the narrator so much that you can't listen to it. So those are the books that I read in May, and those are ranked, like I said, 6 through 1. So at number 1, we had Cursed, 2 was Gilded, 3 was Kingdom of the Feared, 4 was Anna Maria and the Fox, 5 was the Boleyn Inheritance, and 6 was Nightrender. Like I said, all of these books were really good. I enjoyed them. Sometimes the pacing was a little bit off, and sometimes that was very intentional, sometimes it wasn't. So any of those books, if you have read any of those books, let me know down below and tell me what you think. And without further ado, we're going to be getting into my June TBR. Okay, without further ado, let's get into my June TBR. So the first book for June, which I've already started reading it because I finished the other book. The last book I read last month was The Boleyn Inheritance. So I went ahead and started this one. This one was actually my May book of the month. It's Yours Truly by Jimenez. And so far, I'm really enjoying it. I'm about 100 pages in. It'll probably take me until Monday or Tuesday to finish it, just because with everything that's going on at work, plus I am now taking classes for project management. I'm not having as much time to read. I do still try to read a half an hour every day if possible, whether that be in the morning, in the evening, just to try to, it's a good way to relax myself. I love to read before bed. It's a good way of telling my brain that you need to turn off now. So yeah, Yours Truly. This one, I have seen at Target. I have seen a paperback version, so you don't need to get the hardcover, which is good, because I know hardcovers are a little bit more expensive, and books themselves are just becoming more and more expensive because of the paper shortage, which I found something out very interesting when I was talking to Jodi Meadows. Sorry to go back. Because of the paper shortage, you see that the amount of space on the page, they are fitting more words onto the page, which I have a love-hate relationship with. I enjoy it because it makes the book look a little bit more approachable. She told me that this was about 120,000 words, which normally would be 450-ish pages, 500, if you were looking at books that are printed at a normal rate. Hold on. So if you see here, there's a lot more space on the page on either side. The words are a little bit bigger, so they're fitting more words onto the page, which makes it look a little bit more approachable, but also you're spending more time on each page, which can make the story feel like it's dragging on. The second book that I am going to be reading this month, and I'm really looking forward to it, is Legends and Lattes. I saw this book on Kate Kavanaugh's vlog first, and then I just kept seeing it pop up over and over and over again. Several of my friends on Goodreads have read it, and they've all rated it pretty well, either 4 or 5 stars. So I'm excited to get into this book and read it. It's a nice, short, sweet book. The copy I have has a short story in it as well. So it does come to 294 pages total, but I think that's a nice, short, and sweet book to be able to just pick up and read at night, and I've heard that's a lot of fun, so like I said, I'm excited. The third book I'm going to read this month is The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee. I've had this book on my shelf for quite a while. I got it at a book fair, which is, it's a huge warehouse where they sell books at discounted prices. So I picked it up because I had heard a lot of good things about it. So I'm finally going to dig in this month and read it. And especially because for some reason, I think Goodreads is like taking a picture of my shelf at some point. And I keep seeing it on Goodreads as well. Everything that I've heard, that this is also a very good book, so I'm excited to read it. As I mentioned earlier, I am a historian by training. I have my master's degree in medieval studies, but I don't just necessarily, I'm not just interested in that period. This book I picked up after a lecture. It is called Reclaiming Two Spirits, Sexuality, Spiritual Renewal, and Sovereignty in Native America by Dr. Gregory Smithers. And this book has won several awards for the research in it. I am very excited to read this. The term two spirits didn't come around until the 1970s and has really kind of taken off again in the 1990s. It kind of experienced a little bit of a lull. A lot of times you'll see that. And it looks at the people that we would now apply the term two-spirit to throughout history. And this includes people in, let's see, the Cherokee, and other, and this looks at different Native groups throughout the entire continental U.S., some of which are in the Midwest, some of which are kind of more on the eastern coast. I talked to Dr. Smithers whenever we were doing, after he gave his lecture, and he said that a lot of this just comes from getting to know people and being able and comfortable to talk about this with the different groups. He made a lot of connections when he was living in San Francisco area, and then has continued those as he's continued throughout his career. So I think this is going to be a very interesting read, and I will definitely let you guys know how I think about it afterwards. I think the concept of two-spirit, people that identify as neither male nor female, is very interesting, and we're seeing it more often in modern day society. And so I love looking at the historical context of people that lived before us that felt like they could live their true selves. There's a very interesting story of a woman called Eleanor Reichner, who lived in the 1300s, I want to say, in England, and she was a trans woman, and reading the historical account for that is very interesting because they didn't really know what pronouns to use, and because those documents were written in Latin, you had to use either male or female pronouns, so they weren't 100% sure what to use, and they would switch back and forth. Yeah, so Reclaiming Two Spirits, definitely on the list for this month. Okay, the final book on my TBR, and there will definitely be more that pop up throughout the month, audiobooks especially. Since I get those from the library, it's kind of hard to be like, this is 100% being read this month, but this one is one of my physical copies, but it is Egyptian Mythology, A Guide to Gods, Goddesses, and Traditions of Ancient Egypt. I just finished watching the Queen Cleopatra docu-series on Netflix, and I've had this book for a while, but I hadn't really picked it up. I had gone through a little bit of a phase, and so that's why I had this book, but I have never read it, and I definitely want to learn more about Egyptian mythology because I know a lot about Greek and Roman, and I know a decent amount about certain native traditions and Hindu traditions, but I don't know a ton about Egyptian mythology. I know a good amount about the major gods. I can tell you what they represent and mostly what they look like, but I don't know any of the stories behind it. So I'm excited to read this. It's not very long, it's very short and sweet. It's about 200 pages. And so I think that this one will be a fun read to kind of just pick up throughout the month, and I will definitely let you guys know what I think of it. It is by Geraldine Pench, and it is one of the Oxford imprint books. If you guys have read any of the books that I am going to read this month, please let me know down in the comments. I would also love to know what you are planning on reading this month. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.